Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Board of Supervisors meeting on September 25th. It's 9 o'clock, and I call the meeting to order. And can we all rise for a pledge led by Supervisor Medina?
Ready? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Can I have a motion for a certificate of posting?
So move.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none. We'll move on to presentations and recognitions, and the first one is a check in the amount of $5,000 to San Bernardino County Historical Society, and I'll recognize Supervisor Munzer and Medina on that presentation.
If we can have the representatives from the Historical Society. As a young boy in our family business, I used to watch the older generation come in and talk to my grandfather about the way things used to be in Hollister and San Bernardino County. And then as a young man, I used to watch the next generation come in and talk to my dad about the way things used to be in Hollister and San Bernardino County. And towards the end of my career, they were coming in and asking me about the way things used to be in Hollister and San Bernardino County. But these people, the San Bernardino County Historical Society, they're the ones that truly keep the facts about the way things were in San Bernardino County and in Hollister. And I appreciate their hard work. And in with Supervisor Medina, I'd like to present these checks to you. And if Supervisor Medina, okay. And the staff had to do them in two checks, but I'd like to give this to you for a total of $5,000 for your efforts.
We get them. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you want to say anything.
Yeah, sure thing. Hello, good morning. I'm Anita Kane, president of the Society, and on behalf of the San Benito County Historical Society, I'd like to thank the supervisors for this generous financial support. As you know, the Historical Society serves the public by maintaining both the Wappel House Museum in town and the Historical Village in Tres Pinos. And it's a labor of love done by us, accomplished only by hardworking volunteers, grants, partnerships, and donations like this. So we thank you very much. I promise you that your donation today will be put to good use in preserving the historical buildings in our care. And I hope that you'll all be able to attend the grand reopening of our museum at the Wappel House on October 27th at 7 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, actually, it's not 7 p.m. It's an open house all day, so the time is to be determined.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Very good. Okay, very good. Money well spent. We got to preserve our historical heritage. I'm going to take the second one as we're going to have three certificates of appreciation to three companies that really give us some real invaluable contributions to the De Anza Trail. And I would like to invite representatives of the three companies that we're honoring, Recology of San Bernardino County, Don Chapin's company, and Granite Rock, if you join me at the podium. And I also would like to invite Valerie Eglin, who has been doing a tremendous amount of work on the trail as well, and has a little presentation to give and a sign that she wants to show that she refurbished for the trail. So join me at the podium. I appreciate that. right, Phil.
all-
Well, we got Recology here.
They're all at work.
Yeah, they're all working, and there is a lot of work to be done. But at Granite Rock, from the beginning, and I think Valerie will talk a little bit more about that, has done a lot of grading through the years to keep that trail available and safe to the public. And it's utilized not by a lot of people, not only in San Juan, but throughout the whole county and the whole region. It's quite a hike if you're into hiking. Obviously, I'm not, but I've done it once. But Recology has been very kind in putting some trash cans on the trailhead and maintaining that. And as we all know, we all want our state and our region, and our county to be beautified. And looking at trash it's a problem, and we certainly appreciate that contribution. And Don Chapin maintains a restroom facility, which is absolutely essential as well. As that's something that is needed. And I'm going to turn it over to Valerie to give us a little bit of history and the work that she's done, and the volunteers that work behind these companies as well, because it's it's all done with little or no county resources. So I'm going to turn it over to Valerie.
Yes, I'd like to thank Mr. Couchet.
Thank you.
The De Anza Trail goes from Sinaloa, Mexico, up to San Francisco. And it is part of the National Park Service. And they maintain only in name. They can provide signage and verbal support, but basically any area that is part of the De Anza Trail is up to the maintenance of that, or the care or the use of it is up to the county that the trail goes through. So when Richard Place was a supervisor on the board, he considered that the old stage road in San Juan Bautista was an eyesore, difficult to maintain, and was a problem in the county. And the Salinas Grade Road took care of the traffic that needed to get over to the Monterey side. So the county abandoned the road and declared it a county recreational trail. Then they put a gate up on both sides. They got the cooperation of the Monterey County, and put a gate up on the Monterey side and the San Benito side. Now, from the Salinas Grade Road, the Y there where you go up to either the Fremont Peak or towards Salinas, that is where the beginning of the old stage road is also. So there's a short part that goes from there up to the gate that is basically abandoned by the county. However, it is gently maintained by the county. And it is that I'd like to make a plea to the county to try to preserve that a little better, create a better entry area and parking for visitors. This is an international trail. It is acclaimed by the UN. It is part of the Mission Trail and the missions societies that use it as well. So you have a number of different national groups that do use that trail, and it is part of our county. And so it makes it a great asset for us and worthwhile doing some maintenance on. Granite Rock, when Richard Place was able to get the county to claim it as a trail, he got buy-in from Granite Rock. It took them about $50,000 worth of work just to get it in condition, and they have spent money on it every year, grading and maintaining it, and that's 30 years. So Granite Rock really needs appreciation for what they have given to this county. Mr. Couchet was very generous in providing trash cans in order that the rest station there not receive the doggy bags and the garbage that clogged their pumping machine from Tom's Septic. And so that was crucial. And then Tom Septic and Don Chapin have maintained the comfort station. So if you have not been out to the Anza Trail, there are some pamphlets out there, and I invite you to come. And it's an excellent 8-mile walk, is it? 8 miles? This guy walks it.
Ray does it.
Yeah, Ray does it. He got Anthony to go out.
He's been trying.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, that's my plea. I brought this sign was
Valerie?
commissioned by
God, it's made of real wood. It's not plastic.
Ruth Kessler. Commissioned this from Eclipse Art, myself, 30 years ago. And it has been there since, and my grandson and I dismounted it and refinished it so that it can go another 30 years. So,
Yeah, it will go another 30 years, I guarantee you. My dining room table isn't this heavy.
yeah, it's a slab of burl redwood, so it's a very complicated grain, and it won't split and fall apart.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, where do you want it now?
Oh, yeah, right by the door. And I did bring pamphlets, maybe Anthony, you can hand those. And then in the Mission Village Voice this month, there's an article about the trail. And also, beside it is a nice advertisement from Recon.
Okay. And I do have a couple certificates, and since Phil is here, let me find the right one. I remember Supervisor Munzer was saying earlier about the way things were. I used to use that stage road as a jumping off point, go deer hunting, but can't do that anymore. So, Phil, on behalf of San Benito County, we appreciate everything that you do on the De Anza Trail and elsewhere with working with the nonprofits in our community, and we truly do appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. We'll move on to public comment. Madam Clerk, do we have any cards?
Yes, John Schelling.
Good morning. My name is John Schilling. I'm the Superintendent Principal of Southside Elementary School District. Good morning. First off, I would like to thank the Board of Supervisors for dedicating resources to deal with the hillside slippage that has happened along Southside Road. And I also want to thank John and Jason from the Resource Management Agency for their attention to that issue along the road as well. And thankfully, the road opened up yesterday, so our parents are very happy about that. But I do want to make a suggestion to the supervisors to really address how fragile that hillside is, not only along the Blossom Lane area, but also as you move further north towards the migrant labor camp. There was actually some debris on the road this morning, even driving into school this morning. So I would urge the county supervisors to review any future projects that are going along on Southside Road and to really explore some alternative access options from Highway 25 over to Southside. There are some property owners that have some makeshift type roads along their property lines to Southside, which are not really public access points. And as we heard in our last special meeting about the Tyler Way access out of the Ridgemark development, which is a non-public access point. So I'd really urge the supervisors to really look at any future developments that go on in that area and really urge for an alternative access point, not only for the businesses, but for the students that attend Southside School District. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for me?
Any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have no other speaker card.
Anyone else would like to address the board on items not on today's agenda? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the CEO Espinoza for department head announcements.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we do have an announcement out of RMA. I'd like to invite John Girton up.
Thank you. Good morning, supervisors. So I actually have two announcements, and you just heard the first one. so we're happy to announce that Southside Road is reopened. We're kind of thinking of this as a temporary reopening because we still have work to do out there. The good news is that the road will be, if we need to, the road will be closed with traffic control while we do work out there, but we don't know yet what that work's going to entail, so we don't know if we need to close it. So hopefully we'll be able to keep it open indefinitely. And then also, just since it was brought up at that from Superintendent Schilling, we have actually, Supervisor Munzer and I have had a couple of meetings to talk about emergency planning for that area, because this kind of brought to light the need to have additional access plans so that if this type of thing happens again, we can provide better access in and out for the residents who live down there. And then also on another road, which is a new road for the county, later you have an item before you for naming the River Parkway Road, which is the new road that goes around the outer edge of the high school. And that road is scheduled to be completed a week from Friday, so October 5th. And we would like to schedule a ribbon cutting if the board so chooses, and we're looking at potentially 10 o'clock on October 5th, if that works for you all.
Okay. All right. I guess we could talk about that in a little bit here. Is there any questions for the RMA director at this point? I guess I have one. As far as the results from the soils testing, that's do you have a timeline when that report's to be back to us?
I'm hoping we'll get something this week, but I don't recall off the top of my head what the deadline was, but I think it's in the next week or two.
Okay. Do you have plans to give that report to in a presentation to the board, or is it just something that you're use internally and then come back with a project?
Yeah, well, we'll look at it and then we'll formulate a project and then come back to the board with the plan for moving forward. Definitely.
All right. Very good. Anyone else? Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That's all the announcements, Mr. Chair.
Okay. We'll move on to board announcements. Supervisor Medina?
None, sir.
Supervisor De La Cruz?
No, Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Rivas?
I do have a brief announcement and request of you, Mr. Chair, and that is over the last week or so I received a number of calls from concerned residents about the possibility to work towards some safety improvements on an intersection in this county of Fairview Road and Fallon Road. And so I received the concerns from residents out there and from people who drive that route frequently as they drop their children off at Spring Grove School. And so I did discuss the issue with our RMA Director, John Girton. I think the appropriate course of action would be if we can agendize this for a meeting either October 9th or October 23rd, where we could have a presentation from staff about, the concerns, and then that's would be an appropriate time for public to comment on their concerns, and then the board could take whatever action is necessary.
Okay, thank you. I know we've talked about that intersection more than once, and how about we agendize that for, would the 23rd be plenty of time? Okay, 23rd we'll have it agendized, and hopefully the public that has concerns could come to that meeting as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Munzer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On September 12th, the Monterey Bay Community Power Policy Board met, and CEO Tom Hibachi announced that ahead of schedule, the Monterey Bay Community Power has been able to retire both their non-revolving and the revolving line of credit, and have been able to cancel the guarantees that each of the 3 counties had to put up. But I believe our portion was $500,000 that we had to put up. Yep. So that money will be returned to us, or the use of that money will be returned to us, if not already, very soon. So that is great news for the Monterey Bay Community Power. They are moving forward ahead of schedule. And on September 19th, the Monterey Bay Air Resource District met, and we allocated $1.6 million of the AB 2766 grants, of which San Benito High School received $60,000 for new vehicles. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you. That's good news. And for myself, I attended a California Transportation Commission town hall meeting in Aromas. Not Aromas, it was in Gonzales. All these meetings get mixed up. But Supervisor Munzer was there representing the AMBAG board as well. It was a good meeting, highlighting the different highway projects that we have in the region. And it was good to see the California Transportation Commission on the Central Coast, to see the importance of our highway systems that moves, just a tremendous amount of food through the region and throughout the state and nation. And I think it was a real eye-opener on the tour that we took through Taylor Farms vegetable processing plant. Also had a COG meeting last week. Supervisor De La Cruz and I, we continue to stress to Caltrans the necessity of, being as open and transparent with their, projects as possible on the 156 and 25, especially the roundabout, and hopefully there will be scheduling at some point in the future a public meeting to explain, the rationale of that project. So that covers it, right? That covers it. So that's it. We'll move on to consent agenda. Supervisors, is there any items you would like to pull? Seeing none. Anybody from the public would like to pull any of the items? Okay. If not, then we'll entertain a motion for approval of the consent.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none. We'll move on to our public hearing. And we'll go ahead and have CAO introduce it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to go ahead and invite up our RMA Director, John Girton. He's going to be presenting this item.
Good morning again. So you'll recall at our last meeting, we opened a public hearing to consider the creation of a new community facilities district. And we continued that to this meeting, so this would be the continuation of that public hearing. And this is to create a county-wide CFD and to bring in the 3 current developments that want to be part of that CFD and to make that happen and to move forward. We have Greg Davidson, who is the consultant from NBS, who helped us with creating this, and he's going to come and give you the details of everything that went into this and what a CFD is and how this is going to benefit the community.
Good morning. My name is Greg Davidson with NBS. We are a private consulting firm headquartered in Temecula, and we focus on revenue generation for the public sector. In this particular case, I'm going to talk about a community facilities district in front of you today for consideration. This is focused on residential development, and it is to offset the negative fiscal impact associated with certain types of residential development. As these projects are coming in, they put an additional burden on services, excuse me, services that are already being provided to a certain extent by the county. And as these parcels develop, there's an additional burden, an additional need for service between an undeveloped piece of land and a developed piece of land that has residential voters on it, and they need additional services. So we start by considering that negative fiscal impact. We look at the revenues that are produced by these properties as compared to the additional impact on all types of public services to establish those rates. The goal for Brigantino, the Bluffs, and Fay Bennett is to use the Community Facilities District to address those negative fiscal impacts. As a refresher for you, there was a resolution of intention that was brought before you in August that you approved to move this process forward. It was opened, the public hearing was called and opened on September 11th. And then today we have a little bit of a lengthy process. The final formation of a Community Facilities District requires actually 4 actions from you. So we will, after this presentation and after your questions, I would ask that you open the public hearing or open the continuance of the public hearing. Assuming that there is no protest from property owners or registered voters, that we would close that public hearing. The first item that you would consider would be a resolution of formation. This would be your formal approval of the Community Facilities District. And the end game in a Community Facilities District will be a line item on a property owner's tax bill as a property develops and those additional services are warranted in that area. A budget is created and that dollar amount shows up on their tax bill each year. Once you approve the actual district, we will put a resolution in front of you to consider calling the election. The election can actually be held today. We have 3 property owners that will be voting on the formation of the CFD, and those 3 property owners have already signed petitions to form the CFD as well as waive any election requirements. So they have the ability to be presented a ballot ahead of this meeting and be able to cast their ballots as they see fit. Once the election is called for, the clerk will canvass the election and declare those results. At that point, your Community Facilities District is ready to move forward, and we would ask that you consider introducing an ordinance that allows us to levy the district going forward in perpetuity, as long as those services are needed. So if you have any questions about the process, I'm available for that, as well as any questions related to the fiscal impact analysis that was prepared or how the billing methodology would apply to the properties.
Okay. Any questions from the board at this point? Seeing none? Okay, thank you. So we'll go ahead and start. Before I formally continue the public hearing, are there any property owners or registered voters in the community facilities districts who wish to file a written protest? If so, they must be filed with the clerk of the board now. Seeing none? At this time, in place for the public hearing regarding the purpose of formation of community facilities districts number 2018-1, will the clerk of the board please confirm that she has received the following in regard of the public hearing: proof of publication of the notice of the hearing?
Yes, I have received that.
Okay, and a certificate regarding the registered voters and landowners confirming that there are 3 registered voters living in the boundaries of the proposed CFD, and there are only 3 landowners of the land within the boundaries.
Yes, I have received that.
Okay, thank you. Before hearing the public, may we please have the staff report for this item, which I think we just did.
We just did that.
So with that, I think I could open the public hearing. The public hearing's open. Anybody from the public would like to comment? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing and move towards our first resolution of formation.
You need to move to adopt the resolution.
So it'd be
Affirmation.
Resolution 2018-67?
Correct.
So per staff recommendation, move for approval of Resolution 2018-67.
Second, Mr. Chair.
Okay, very good. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none. We'll go on to resolution calling for an election.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none. Now we'll do the resolution declaring the results and direction of recording of
Nope.
specific tax liens.
First, we need to have the election. So we've called the election, so now the clerk of the board needs to canvass the ballots in the election and report
Okay,
the
I'm ahead
results.
of myself.
You are.
I knew I would.
I confirm that I have received 3 ballots in favor of the formation that includes a waiver authorizing the election, and that I have prepared my official certificate declaring that the election is closed and the measure has passed.
Okay. The record shows that at least 2/3 of property owners' ballots are in favor of the levy and the special taxes establishment of the CFD. We may now proceed with the final actions for the Community Facilities District. Now I'll entertain a motion of declaring the results of the special landowner election and directing recording of the tax lien.
Exactly.
Mr. Chair, as stated, motion as stated.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none. Motion. And as one of the last items of business, I may entertain a motion to introduce the waive the reading and schedule the second reading and consideration and adoption of the ordinance of the County of San Bernardino levying special tax within the Community Facilities District for October 9th, 2018.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none. I think that takes care of that order of business. Very good. Thank you. We'll move on to a regular agenda. CEO Espinoza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to go ahead and invite up our management analyst, Dulce Alonzo. She'll be presenting this item.
Hi, Board. Good morning. I have David here from HDLA, who has been working with key stakeholders to get a draft ordinance to you, and that's what will be presented to you today. So, David, would you like to?
Full screen.
Good morning, members of the board. David McPherson, HDL. Today we are following up regarding the meeting that we had in July in discussion of the next steps to address the cannabis policy discussion. At that meeting, the board had desire to discuss consideration of, instead of reinventing the wheel, taking the existing ordinance that was drafted and reviewed by the stakeholders and by the board and evaluating that. And so sitting back with staff and looking at some of the considerations of what has changed since that ordinance was put together, we have the following for you. The second part of that conversation was that we provided you some number based on some number of permits. Concern was not only the number of permits, but also the rates that were being utilized in there, and we confirmed that the rates that we were providing you were realistic numbers based on actually rates that were lower than the prevailing rate that you had in your tax ordinance at the time, of the rates that were consistent with surrounding counties and the direction of the rates that are going for you. As such, part of that discussion was the numbers, and when we met with some of the board members on with the numbers, of permittees would be permitted. That assumption of these numbers was based on those conversations and realistic of what may be there, even though there may be some unlimited numbers. We looked at what Hollister already has done, being a first mover and kind of saturating the market, and expectations, and a reality check on if this numbers will even get to there. So as we mentioned in July, we met, had that conversation after the direction was to go meet with the stakeholders, in which we did, remodifying or addressing the draft that was provided to us. And then we're here today to present you just an outline of those discussions, and then my evaluations of the existing ordinance. Primarily the changes we made were just to get up to current law on some of the changes that were made, and then fine-tuning some things that there were some technical problems and concerns with them, but nothing major. So after today, as we indicate here, the ordinance already addressed the time, place, and manner things for the regulations. After you provide further direction on us, we'll go back and fine-tune, bring back that staff report and an ordinance associated with that. Just to step back one, to address the dates. As you can see, the next step would be on October 17th to present that changes to you, and then the Planning Commission, and address it to the Planning Commission. We'll talk about what needs to go to the Planning Commission and what may not need to go to the Planning Commission based on some options for you. And then if we continue moving in that progression at your direction, we will come back on November 6th to present the Catamount's introduction, and then the 20th would get us a final reading in there. So as we went through the ordinance, we tried to clean up a few things. The first thing that we looked at was we removed the reference to the federal guidelines, the Cole memo. That was rescinded by Jeff Sessions, and therefore we wanted to make sure we had nothing that was linked to that, even though by policy you would follow consistency of that. It just doesn't exist anymore. And so any ordinances or regulations, even at the state level, don't have any cross-reference to that or even to the state attorney general's opinion. So we have a legal market here in California. And we added language regarding the intent based on the direction and discussion that we were provided, that we're no longer, when you're in 2017, the focus is just on medical as you transition not only your tax, but in those discussion, unless you tell us otherwise, we now are addressing both the adult use and the medicinal use. So we're kind of silent on it and cleaned up the ordinance to reflect that. So then it would be referencing both of those in the definitions. Anything through the ordinance reflects that. In the definitions, we remove reference to only medical in the definitions. We redefine enforcement officers a little bit, gave a little more flexibility on not just tying into specific positions, but based on who the county administrator may use as the designee in those positions and roles. We clearly define, based on some discussion with some of you about, not outdoor, but what defines outdoor, not hoop houses, but greenhouses. And so we clearly define a greenhouse being an indoor and what that means by definition to be considered an indoor. There was a lot of discussion regarding youth center, not only in some of your definitions that we'll talk about, but even the state definition was so vague it never clarified what a youth center. So we provided a definition that you will see as we present the draft to you that really looks at some unique scenarios that we've encountered throughout the state that agencies have had the complexity of trying to determine, does this count as a youth center or not? For example, I'll just use Chuck E. Cheese, for example, right? Some people would say that defines a youth center, but by definition it does not. But, you get scenarios like that we'd have to look at. Prohibited activities. The intent, as the desire of the board, has been clearly not to have any retail establishments in there. So for consistency, we just redefined how you wordsmithed it in there to actually mimic state law of what defines retail. It's no longer determined as a dispensary. It's actually called a retailer or non-storefront retailer. And because micro business is a business that's vertically integrated with all 4 touching points, we clearly defined that even if a micro business was permitted, that it would not be allowed to have the retail end of that activity in the ordinance. And so we re-emphasized that. But we did remove some of the categories based on the direction given to us, which we'll talk about. The permit types, the permits will be issued by the county administrative officer. In the old ordinance, it was to a cannabis officer or coordinator. Again, that's to provide flexibility. It doesn't take away that there could be one assigned or appointed or a position to that. By saying the county administrator and his or her designee gives a lot more flexibility to different positions that may play certain roles. So we just kind of made it a little more generic to provide that in there. Other than that, there was no other substantial changes in that section. So the cannabis business program itself, the applications forms will be established. Again, that was already in there. We didn't change that. We will provide you application procedures and forms and guidelines that will be adopted by you by resolution, so you're comfortable with how it does come about and any issues or how it's presented to any applicant or any concerns you may have. And we'll talk about some of the things that will be in that criteria. It'll create a merit-based scoring process for permits who are limited. In some cases, permits that...
Excuse me? Supervisor De La Cruz?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Might as well say it now. The application forms. Ray, John, help me out here. When we started this whole program, Mr. Chair, we asked members of the public, even dispensaries and marijuana businesses, to submit an application, and we went through a lot of hoops, and just it was crazy. And in fact, to the point where we told some of the members of the public that this is what we're going to do, and at the end of the day, it didn't come out to be that way. In fact, we used that list for other purposes other than to give permits. My question is right now is that if we're going to move forward with this program, and I guess I ask the board members because we're the policymakers here today, are we going to go through that circus again, or are we really serious about doing something?
Let me make sure I understand your question correctly, Supervisor De La Cruz. What you're asking is for that allocations list that the 26 people that businesses that submitted that they be considered front of the line. Is that what you're asking right now?
Well, that's a small component. I'm talking from a global perspective. Are we going to treat these new applications, if they're going to be new applications, the same way we treated those 26 earlier? I'm willing to bet. I don't know if there's someone, member of the public here, who's part of that 126, and ask them for their opinion, see how they were handled, and the fairness and the circus that we went through all this. I mean, I'm willing to bet somebody around here who's here will tell you that no, we weren't treated the way we thought we should have been treated. So my question is, from a global perspective, are we going to ask them to fill out new applications, the 26 plus others, or is it like it starts all over again? And then is it going to be a fair process that we could actually see an end result, a product on the table?
I'm going to ask the CAO comment. He looks like he wants to comment, and then after that, I kind of want to get through the presentation, and then we could ask those questions if we could. CAO Espinosa.
Yeah, I was just going to highlight. I understand Supervisor De La Cruz's concerns, and actually, I think there were valid concerns at the time. There was uncertainty on how we were going to process. There were other items that were kind of occurring. We were trying to address timing on different matters. So I think that was part of the issue. One of the reasons why we hired HDL is they've gone through this process time and time again, so they understand the process. They understand how they can assist us with this process as well. So we're going to be looking to them for guidance, as well as RMA, and having a more strategic approach on how we actually tackle this, and making sure RMA is involved as well as administration. I think we have a better way of looking at this. Before, we were trying to process this and get this through. We were trying to also develop the ordinance, and then with the uncertainty of did we want to move forward with it, we weren't sure if the public was going to approve the tax. So there was a lot of uncertainties and a lot of other things that were kind of happening at the time. Now there's a surety, and we kind of know what direction. If the board wishes to move forward with this, we have to have a process, and that's what this is. That's what this is.
I feel more comfortable, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Please continue.
Thank you, Chair. And maybe some of the things at the end might clarify some of some of your questions as well as we get to there. And then the cannabis permit types. So based on the guidance that we were provided and the permit types that would now be opened up for consideration, or part of your discussion will be today, is that every category will now be allowed except for retail. And the limitations that reflected, again, knowing that even though you have an unlimited amount of consideration for all activity except for cultivation, that doesn't mean that the volume is going to come in for all these categories beyond our numbers that we had provided to you. So that's the permit types where these were not permitted in the old ordinance before. These are now at least consideration for discussion as far as allowing all activities except for retail. And then the application process, the old ordinance already talked about background checks. The only thing that we stuck in the ordinance is the Department of Justice and FBI actually have restrictions on how the Sheriff's Department would be able to actually get authorization to do background checks. So we just put the information, the requirement by law that gives them the permission and authority to do that, in which then we'll have a resolution provided to you that we would be have you adopt and approve that will go to the DOJ and FBI so that the sheriff's staff will be able to conduct backgrounds for that activity. And then updated initial application renew due dates. The old dates just had a 2017, 2018. Obviously, we're moving in time, so we just reflected that in the time frame that we would be moving on. Number of permits, again, for discussion based on speaking to some of you that we're providing for this unlimited numbers for all activities except for cultivation. And thus the reason for a merit-based process for if it ends up 50 or whatever number you determine, is that if you had more than that number, you would have to have some kind of process to vet it out. Regarding the other activities, you would use the same kind of criteria. However, you wouldn't be actually ranking them for the purposes of for the merit base. It would be basically looking at a quality insurance. Typically what we do when there's not a restriction on the numbers is the goal would be using 80% criteria, so that is the equivalent quality of how to get a state permit, because we're using that standard. So if you issued a permit that was below that and they went to the state, try to get a permit and get rejected, then they're back to square one because they have to redo their application. Our goal is to have a quality insurance so that they are successful in getting their state permit in that same criteria. The restrictions, same that you had in there before. The boundary line setback of 300 feet. That the purpose primary for that one is that the distance regarding the odor mitigation. We both, as the other criteria that we've discussed with you, is having cultivation that would be considered in a greenhouse or outdoor in a property that's non-commercial zoned. That would be 10 acres or more, and that way the odor mitigation component of that would reflect that. And our studies have shown in other counties that have outdoor greenhouses that is from boundary to boundary line is an effective means from where the grows are. And then if a property happens to be less than 10 acres, and in some cases it's not going to impact a resident or certain areas of that zoning, that then they could appeal that or go through a hearing process to make sure there's no concerns of properties that would be less than than 10 because there may be some unique circumstances that would permit them to do that. Cultivation can also occur on commercial property, which is the initial discussion of having it indoors, using it in the appropriate zoning areas for commercial property that the Planning Commission will consider as part of this process should you direct them to do so. Grounds of desire, the only thing we changed there is state law says that an applicant must be at least 21 years of age. The old ordinance reflected that they had to be 18, and understandable probably at the time they were looking at that it was only medicinal, but that was before the state regulations came out, I believe, when this draft was put together. The revocation or suspension, no substantial changes in there, so we did not indicate anything. In the facilities, you had listed that it was a transport permit only, with the intent, I believe, was so that they can move their product. A distribution license is really a transport license. There are two types of distributors. A distributor license that can move products of their own and others, and there's a distributor transport only license so that the permittee could only move their own product. So we just changed the definition to be distributor since we, at this time, were directed to allow distribution in there so they can either choose one or the two trigger points as a distributor license. We added definitions for manufacturing permits requirements, so that was clearly defined in there in this section. And we added testing lab requirements, so now we have requirements of minimum standards for all the categories that may be taken under consideration. For record keeping or requirements, no substantial changes were put in there. In 7.020.130, that section, the old language was really talking about if the tax passes and what the tax would do and things of that nature. Since the tax had already passed and there doesn't need to be discussion anything in there because your ordinance already, the other ordinance already reflects that. We know with the changing of times, everything changes, little nuances. For example, the other day we had a conversation with someone of putting additional definitions in for waste disposal. Wow, there's such a moving definitions or requirements or policies and procedures in this. By having this language in there, it gives the city administrative officer or his designees a little flexibility in rules or guidelines that don't need to be so stringent in law or ordinance in order to mitigate and address those concerns and create procedures for oversight without having to change the ordinance. And of course, as state law changes, then that reflects it as well. And right now we're doing delivery services issues regarding can you ban them or not ban them, and the state regulations are specifying that it's not, so it gives that language in there as well. And then if any changes to state law as indicated here. So no changes in 0.14 of the nuisance declared. Enforcement, again, no substantial changes. And then the last one, the severability clauses, we did not find anything, but we do not have input from council yet. But I believe there has nothing in here at this time that reflects any additional changes in there. So as we talked about the application process, again, depending on if you limit the numbers or do not, but under the assumption that we will have unlimited, the goal would be is to set an application process that reflects the state requirements, but also the standard quality that you would want to have a business to make sure they're meeting here. This is kind of the checklist of things that we would provide or request from the applicant to demonstrate in there. And for the category at this time, if its cultivation does have a limited, then of course the quality of the applicant on this criteria would be a scoring element that would be weighted based on the input from staff and from you as we bring it back to you for the discussion, specifically for the application process. Although it is not desired to have the board have to approve who gets the permits on it, but at least the procedural guideline we may bring back to you just to get your blessing so you're comfortable with how it is presented and how the criteria is going to be scored if that is your desire. So the last point in here in having discussion, and it can go one of two ways, and I think it's desire of staff in our initial conversation is typically you can go one of two ways of how you get through the process to move it through. You can do a regulatory element of this, and then on top of that, do a CUP requirement to that. Or in this case, you have a regulatory ordinance that actually mimics a lot of what a CUP has to do, that you can do a regulatory permit issue and not have to put through every single one of these through a CUP, which has to go to the planning commission and come back to you. It would still meet the same standards and requirements of quality control, but it would be regulatory versus them having to go through a CUP process as well. Why is that critical or different? 2 reasons. One, if you have a concern with a permittee, through a CUP process, they have entitlement, and regardless if you move them out, that property is still entitled to do that function. Versus if you have a concern regarding a location or an applicant, or law enforcement has concerns regarding a location of concern, and you have just cause to get rid of that permit, you just revoke the permit and you say no one's going to be doing anything on that property anymore because that owner or property does not have entitlement through the CUP. The second part of it is that this process goes a lot faster without a lot of delays and having to do a lot of activities, but again, it mimics it in that respect. And so that's one of the scenarios. What that means, Planning Commission will basically only have to give their blessing as you would of where things will be permitted, not the criteria when they're, although they'll see that and provide recommendations and input to that, to this ordinance. It does not mandate that they have to go through it and do that during this element in there. So that is the conclusion of this presentation. More happy at this time to answer any questions, and I'll turn it over to administration or to the chair.
Any questions from the board at this point?
Mr.
Supervisor De La Cruz?
Yeah, thank you. More from an auditing and financial perspective, on the item that went before the public and it got approved, help me out here, Joe Paul. Does it have language in there how the audit? Because we have Joe, who works for the county. We can definitely use his talent to make sure we keep an accounting of those dollars that are being generated out there. So does a tax measure that got approved? Well, it's not the tax measure. I'm sorry, the opinion of the public. Does that include some language, some provision to allow the audit department to look into the books of some of these operations?
Yes, so in both, and that's what I was going to get to, even in the section here that we didn't change, there we go. In section here, the 702.120 records, you have the authority to do that for 2 things. One, for financial audit component in there. Secondly, the importance of this is that if the law enforcement has any concerns, either an employee saying, hey, I was working for this business and they're doing illegal activities, or they get complaints regarding a business that has some concerns, they don't have to get a subpoena in order to go and look for investigation on that. So that's there. The second part of it gives you all that stuff related from a tax component. But to answer your question on the other tax measure, or the tax measure ordinance that has the confidential financial records that gives you the authority to verify and validate the taxes being appropriately and get access to that information in any means necessary. Okay. So there kind of is a dual role on both sides of this. It gives you that flexibility in order to get that information to validate the taxes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, I have a question. I have a couple of questions, and I'm not sure if who can answer if you can answer, but it's related to the permitting. And so I know that in the 4th page of the presentation, the top slide there says permits will be issued by county administrative officer, and so does that mean that the permitting approval of all permits will go through the CAO's office?
Yes, the way the ordinance was written, again, we didn't really modify it. We just said he was the one authorizing. Before it said it was a cannabis coordinator. I think the only one that would be consideration, and that's something that we can have further discussion, is if you end up having the cultivation where it goes beyond the number that you choose and the merit base, if there needs to be a decision made, and where the administrator may want to bring that back to the board just for that and the unlimited.
Yeah, and so that's what. And so I have 2, questions off of based on that. Is the first is an appeal process, so that would be determined by the CAO if there is an appeal process, or
The appeal process, actually, where we didn't make any change to, is very detailed as far as what was already in the ordinance that you guys had discussed at one point.
That doesn't change.
Yes.
What I would like to see changed is, I think, if to have like a permit review committee, Mr. Chair, as far as making sure that this, the sheriff's office has the opportunity to review, sit down, and be part of the review process of these permits. I think that whatever other players could come to the table, that have some substantial impacts, or could have some concerns about any of these permits or these applicants. I think that it would make for a stronger ordinance if there was more of that collaboration.
So what you're suggesting, sheriff's office and maybe a couple other
I don't know who
playing departments like the ag
I don't know
department.
who. I would leave that to the CAO, but what I would like to see is rather than it I have no problem it being issued, a permit being issued by the CAO, but there certainly should be a review committee to help make that decision, not just the CAO themselves, based on all of the application, the selection criteria, and what we're going to be looking at.
CAO Espinosa.
Yeah, I was going to highlight 7.02.070. I think it's the first bullet there. It talks about having background checks. So there is some. There is some process, but we could put some more language in there.
And if I may, you saw the checklist criteria that I shared with you. So just quickly, in a high profile, what we'll bring back to you for your blessing is we typically will create a 4-step process. Step 1 is proposed location and background checks. That's just you're in or out based on the qualification act. Step 2 is your application package, which you saw the criteria we provide to them. That's being reviewed by certain staff, and if we're assisting in that. Step 3 actually is even though there's not a limited, will be a kind of an informal interview with the applicants to kind of just evaluate the process, of which typically it will include someone from the Sheriff's Department, someone from Finance, and someone from RMA to participate in that discussion, so then they can vet out any concerns that we find in the actual written documentation for discussion. And so that scoring element is that it's those SMEs that are involved in that they provide, then score and provide a recommendation to the county administrator, so that when that ranking or quality insurance is looked at, he's making it based on his staff presenting that. So that's kind of where that panel comes together in that element.
Supervisor De La Cruz.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I think Supervisor Reeves is actually correct, and I support his position. And I also want to add that adding more eyes to the application without knowing what the name is, it gives us more value to make a determination or a recommendation. But at the same time, we need to cautious that we don't tilt the application or the recommendation to say no, because some departments, by the nature of their job responsibilities, will say no. And so we don't want that type of data or recommendation coming in. We want some departments that will provide a fair, balanced, objective scoring system and saying, okay, for the following reasons, this is what we recommend. So I want to make sure it's done fair, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, SAO.
Well, go ahead.
And I think that's kind of here is when we bring this back to you, that what we do is, based on what you just determine, we'll weight the score on each one of these functions. They're really focusing on the checklist of things that we provided here in this slide, and they're all giving a criteria that do they meet that criteria or not. It's not to be subjective. It's did they meet this criteria that we're asking in that aspect of it.
Mr. Chair, you mentioned earlier about that if an applicant moves away from the land and someone comes out, there's some scenarios that will take into effect. I have a real concern about that application, because one of the recommendations, the criteria that's being considered is the qualifications of the principals. And so if you have an applicant that got that permit and is doing something with that land, and then for whatever reason something happens and there's a transition that will occur, we want to make sure that qualifications of the principals are at a higher standard, at a minimum meets whatever the prior qualifications of the principals are. Because, I mean, for us, the policymakers, we want to make sure that we get, I'll say it, we get the best and the brightest of the applications that will come in.
Absolutely. And your ordinance, and again, one thing we did not change is for transferability of that, there's detailed language of how that transferability occurs, and it almost mimics that you have whoever it's transferred to has to go through a vetting process equivalent to that, so that's not the good guy comes in and brings in the bad guy later.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that's already in your ordinance as it was drafted, so we didn't change the details of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Ray?
I was just going to go back to Supervisor Rivas' comment. I think what I'm hearing from Supervisor Rivas is we need to have a group or a committee of some sort, and I think what we can do is make sure we document the RMA staff, the sheriff's staff, and we can have some language in here that accommodates that request.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea in the fact that, I'm just trying to get my arms around the having it going through the administration for a land use decision. I look at it a little bit as a land use decision as well, rather than through the planning or RMA department as being the lead.
Well, they will still lead. Like, again, the process will mimic it, but if you do it through a CUP, you got to come back for individual. If you end up having 50 permits, you're going to have to review a CUP and do a separate hearing for each one of those versus having it mimic that. You still have a public hearing of concerns of the property. You will still require the same things. They will still have to go through the same building planning code requirements as you would for a CUP. Again, not only the expediency of it is that if you have a problem with a property, once you issue that CUP and you get rid of the bad actor, and there's still a public safety concern or welfare for that operation being at that location, they are now have legal entitlement to continue doing that regardless if you get rid of the bad actor. So that gives you the flexibility by doing it by a regulatory permit versus a CUP.
Yeah, I'm kind of leaning towards the regulatory issuance myself. Supervisor Taylor Cruz?
When I was on the Planning Commission a long time ago for the City Hall Strip, we give out permits for daycare centers, and there were residents that work at nighttime and sleep at daytime. And what we decided to do was give a 1-year permit, a 1-year review permit, and if there was no residents who were complaining, then we give them the permit for another year. If there were, then we just yank it out without any vested rights. So that legal challenge doesn't bestow upon the city or the county in this case.
And it kind of mimics that in general. However, that's what the just cause is. You have to have just cause to revoke the permit. However, the permit is only from year to year, both at the state and at the county level. But to just say, well, we just decide not to get to, you pretty much have to have a just cause in order to say, no, we're not going to renew it, as long as they do it timely, they meet the criteria, there's no concerns. Even though it's a renewal, but it gives you the evaluation. For example, let's say that you do a financial audit on them and there's concerns about it and they're not paying their liability. Well, then you don't have to renew the permit because you've got some just cause to look at it. Or there's other concerns regarding issues or several citations or warnings related to that. Those are just cause things that would give you opportunity to do that, versus having to go through a whole process in a CUP to revoke the permit.
And then, Mr. Chair, on the other side of the coin, if somebody develops a daycare center, say, 4 years after that permit's given, can the process deny that applicant just because now there's a daycare center there 3 years forward?
Typically, both in the local and state law, they're grandfathered in if something comes after it. At least in state law it is. And I would defer to RMA director, but typically it's their grandfather in because they were there first, and if someone comes in after, then it's hard to, especially when they got a big investment in assets and building a business. Just because someone moves in, they know what they're moving next to. It's not the opposite.
Okay. If there's no further questions from the board, I'll open it up for public comment. Do we have any speaker cards?
Yes, Michael Caraccio.
Good morning. I'm Michael Crodjo. I'm the founder of Samerical. I was here in July, introduced myself, gave you our business plan. Hopefully you had an opportunity to look at it. I'm here basically to educate you on plant science. I'm an expert in this field, 11 years in cannabis CBD. university research. I'm working with the DEA right now trying to get in the clinical trials for San Diego State University, which they just awarded for Tilray up in Canada to ship oils from Canada to our state. And the reason they're allowed to do that because they say that there's no one in the United States that has oils like there. Well, those people they're totally wrong on that. So my plant science research and soil research, I'm all about organic, living soils, no chemicals, liquid fertilizer. So if you take a plant and you need antioxidants, the plant needs antioxidants to protect itself. Plants can't run away from insects, animals, the UV radiation from the sun. So if you take an iceberg lettuce when it's enclosed, well, the outside will have some antioxidants, but the inside it's mainly minerals and water and fiber. But if you take a romaine lettuce and its leaves are sticking out, they're full of antioxidants, which our body needs. A lot of plants produce cannabinoids. We all know that. Cannabinoids help the cells work together. That's where Parkinson's is involved. I've had great results with that. My strains, I have 2 strains now that I've had companies from all around the world fly in to visit with me, and I've been offered millions of dollars for them. And why I want to do it here, because I love our area, but the main thing is outdoor versus indoor. The cannabinoid profile from indoor versus outdoor doesn't even come close. The results from indoor, the plant isn't doing what it does out in the sun in nature. And the results with the patients we've been working with for the last 4 years for opioids, for cancer, I've done remission in cancer, is phenomenal difference. Hemp doesn't even come close to what my strains do. So the hemp products that are out there, you'll be buying from us. And my revenue is showing by year 3 for the company that we have 40 acres that we're putting together is over $230 million starting year 3 in revenues. I have so many clients that want to buy from us, but I'm coming out of R&D research and going commercial, and I want to do it here. And I just want to make sure you understand how important outdoor is for our company and for the patients who are going to be using it versus indoor. And we're going to design it so it's just like a military operation where you have to go through securities. I can't afford anyone stealing clones and so forth. So,
okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
No other speaker cards?
Anyone else?
Good morning, board members. Elia Salinas, San Benito County resident. I'd like to touch on a couple of issues, and I've got 3 minutes, so I've got to hurry up here. Priority of applications, Supervisor De La Cruz, you mentioned earlier, and it's very important to me. I've been here since day one. Everybody here on the board knows who I am. And I'm disappointed because it says that they contacted key stakeholders, and I think I consider myself a key stakeholder, and I've reached out and no one ever, came out and even communicated with me that I could be part of this study and trying to get this ordinance going. Anyway, I think that you should go ahead and focus on the priority of the people that came forward, the first people that came forward. They put their names out there, they put their addresses out there, and then they were denied. Again, one of my biggest complaints is the county made an error in not taking any money, not getting any kind of fees from them, so these people were able to do their crop, get it out of the county, and we didn't see a penny of it. So hopefully, once the regulations come out, we're going to have some type of fees that are going to be conducive, obviously, to cover all the costs for going over the ordinance, going over the applications, and I totally agree that it should be done on a committee basis. I think, excuse me, we don't have to look far. We have the city of Hollister. I think we should go ahead and use the resources that we have and what they do. They've got the fire department, they've got the police department, they've got planning department, they've got, they've got the city manager. So that obviously that's what we need to reach out here. You need to concentrate on actually offering, contacting also the fire department, not just sheriff's department, but there's a lot of resources that need to get involved, that are going to be involved in going through the permit process, and those are the people that should be able to be reviewing the applications. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. I'm trying to go over here. The outdoor grow. There are. No one's ever mentioned about banning or not banning, and it's always no one's saying that they were going to approve outdoor grow. I think we need to take steps at a time. With regards to getting this ordinance done, and I don't think we should be caught up on trying to say whether that we're not going to have or we're going to have outdoor grow. It's never been approved. No one's ever discussed having outdoor grow, so I don't think it's a subject we should be discussing at the moment. So I think we should just table that. The other thing is that with regards to being everybody coming to all the applications being on an equal basis, I've got people calling me all the time, and they're saying, this guy has this property or this person has this property, and they're guaranteeing that they're going to get a permit. Nobody's guaranteed to get a permit. They all have to go through the process, and it has to be a great process that I know that the county's been working on really hard, and I think that we can be very successful in this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Honorable Chair, members of the board, Victor Gomez with Pinnacle Strategy. Certainly want to thank Dave and his team for the work that has gone into revising the ordinance. It all sounds really good. The rest of it is really just left, I think, from a public policy perspective and kind of what you guys are going to expect out of it. So I just wanted to highlight a couple of things, and again, thank you, Mr. Chair. You made a commitment earlier this year that if Measure C passed, the board would move on this ordinance. So we appreciate your leadership and thank you for that. A couple of points that I want to focus on, and that is the first one is the permit limit. It says that you guys are considering a 50 permit limit. I think I haven't seen the ordinance, but I think that needs to be clarified a little bit. Do you mean permit holder? Do you mean individual permits? What type permits? I'm sure that's stuff that Dave is working on, but we just need to make sure that that's clarified in there, because if it's strictly, 50, 10,000 square foot permits, then you're obviously going to be limiting yourself to revenues. So take that into consideration. If that is the case, you may want to raise that limit amount. And then also with the limit amount, take into consideration, you probably want to put a permit limit because you want to crawl before you walk, right? And I think staff wants to do that as well. You want to be prepared to administer a program that you could handle. So even if you do hit a permit limit, I would suggest that you consider sunsetting that permit at some point, so you don't hold yourself back from revenues in the future. Boundary line setbacks, that makes sense especially for parcels 10,000 square feet or, parcels 10 acres or larger. I would hope that if you do consider under one of the check marks, if cultivation is on a property less than 10 acres, it will require a hearing process. I think that is very smart of you to do that. One of the biggest issues we had was on the 5-acre parcels. And so I don't think you want to ban 5-acre parcels, but you certainly want to prohibit these cultivations from occurring if the neighbor is opposed to it, right? So it does give you some discretion with a more thorough process. But that boundary line setback may have to be adjusted on 10 acres or less. So take that into consideration, because if you're set back 300 feet on a 5-acre parcel and you could do it and the neighbors are okay with it, there's going to be nowhere to grow, right? So take those things into consideration as you're kind of molding that stuff. But overall, I think you guys are doing a fantastic job. And again, I commend you, Mr. Chair, and the board for your leadership on this, and we look forward to continuing the work. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? If not, we'll close the public comment and bring it back to the board. Supervisor De La Cruz.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Victor actually had an interesting statement earlier. you know that the appeal process, if it's 10,000 acres, 10,000 square feet or less, can we set a time frame in which the county will make a determination on that appeal? Because I don't want 100 applicants who are 10,000 or less saying, hey, calling the supervisors, hey, why hasn't the county moved on it? So I really want a due date on it, Mr. Chair, Ray, because again, I don't want members of the public calling us and telling us what's going on.
I believe we can reevaluate that when we bring the draft. I think the appeal process or the hearing component does stipulate a time frame in there. I want to, don't hold me to this, I think it's less than 30 days.
Okay.
But we can check that and look at a reasonableness test on that and provide that to you. Regarding the 300-foot appeal component, again, if you have that criteria, it's an automatic, there's not an issue. It's anything less than that, obviously, then there's an assumption that the distance requirement would also be a concern from that property, and it could be consideration of under 300 feet, but it would go through that hearing discussion as part of that. It wouldn't be hard to that component of it.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, it's 10 acres, I'm sorry.
10 acres.
We knew you
10 acres, yeah.
We knew what you meant.
Okay. Any other comments or questions from the board? I guess we're pretty much on the correct path, and I like the timelines. It means that the ordinance will get back to us, and there will be another public hearing process with the Planning Commission as well and their input, and then it comes back to our board. So I'm pretty happy with the progress.
Mr. Chair, if I may ask, clarification on something Mr. Gomez brought up was the permit holder or licensee. When we put that number in there, we didn't clarify that. Maybe some direction is that 50 licensees or permits or 50 licensee. For example, in Santa Barbara County, they have multiple hundreds, almost 1,000 permits, but they only have 98 licensees because they're all on one property. So, if someone wanted to have 5 licenses on one property, are we saying that's 5 out of the 50, or are we saying that's one licensee? Maybe some direction or clarity might be helpful as well.
Yeah, I know when we had our meeting, I wasn't too clear as far as the proper direction to go in as well. I think what was a concern of mine is the manageability for this county going forward. I don't know if there would be beating down our doors, so to speak, where we need 100 permittees, and I think the suggestion from Mr. Gomez was a good suggestion. Maybe have a limit and a cap, whatever that number is, and then review it after a couple of years after the program has been established, and we have a reasonable comfort level, and we see what the revenues are against, what the expenses.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yeah.
So, I think if everyone recalls, when we went through this process before, I think it was only 37, if I recall, about 37 or 27 applicants at the time. So I think one of the reasons why we put 50 was that was a good number, I think, that we had from experience. Obviously, I think maybe putting some language to come back and reopen if we have to, I think would be appropriate as well.
Mm-hmm. Any other comments from the board?
Mr. Chair, Ms. Salinas did raise up a question about, enclosed or not. Is that at the Planning Commission level they're going to talk about?
Well, we could talk about it right here, right now.
No, it's fair, yes.
How does your ordinance currently reflect strictly indoors is the way I read it?
Yes, and I was at direction discussion with some of you that there was concern regarding outdoors, so it was at your direction that we had done that at the time. So it's your discretion to provide us direction to modify what we have drafted at this time, if that's your desire.
Mm-hmm. Let's go ahead, Supervisor De La Cruz. You have more to add?
No, I'll favor indoor, Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Medina?
Indoor.
Supervisor Rivas?
Yeah, indoor.
Supervisor Munzer? Okay, you have direction. And then as far as the 50 permits, is that a good number to go with? That's what the staff's recommending.
So, Mr. Chair, just a clarification. If it's 50, then the opportunity for someone to have a land and there's 10 or 20 licensees in there, is that part of the 50?
Well, and that's a question I asked. I mean, we're not set on that. It was kind of direction at the time was, what were you comfortable with moving slow? Was it kind of the direction was desired? It was about 50 permits, but we didn't clarify if, again, someone has 10 different, let's say 10 outdoor grow greenhouses, is that 10 licenses or is that one permittee with 10 licenses? So maybe clarity from what you would desire to do. We'd be more happy to amend it based on that recommendation.
Yeah, because I don't know if there's some. God, I usually don't like to bring members of the public, but you could probably answer my question. Are there any business-to-business that function in that licensees concept?
When you say business, you mean like other like manufacturing or distribution and things of that nature?
Within that same legal, lot.
You can do all four activity, well, minus the retail. Typically what we're seeing, no matter what someone does, is they add distribution in there to move their own product because that's an expense that they have to encumber to have someone else to do it. So if you're a cultivator, you're most likely going to be a distributor because you're just moving your own product. If you're a manufacturer, you're going to do distribution. And so that's the elements that go in there. If you had multiple cultivators on one property, they may have one strategic distributor, or they all may be distributors on there, but it's usually within that same, that footprint that they're operating on for their permit if it's a cultivator. Again, what we saw in Santa Barbara, and it's worked pretty effectively, is they only have 98 permittees, but those permittees on the same premises are allowed to have multiple licenses on that as long as they still meet the criteria regarding that you're providing them. And they still have to go through proper watering, proper electricity, proper roadage, parking, all that kind of stuff that planning will determine, or RMA will determine, still meet those functionalities before they get too many other types of greenhouses on one property. So that's just things that's going to happen just from that element in there that will be addressed regardless of how many permits are on the property. So if you wish to allow them to have more licenses on one permit and just one permit per property, that's your discretion to direct us on.
Yeah.
I was just going to suggest, I think that would be the best way from, to approach that.
Right. I agree. Okay. You have direction. And good work, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Good job. Okay, we'll move on. How about we take a short break, a 10-minute break? How's that?
provider that will provide us substance abuse treatment in a licensed residential home, and it will fulfill the requirements that we have for this particular component for our drug Medi-Cal contract with the State Department of Health Care Services.
Okay, great. I think one of the concerns that we had was that that the services being somewhat coordinated here in San Bernardino County with Sun Street Center, and as well as maybe having a meeting with them to try to make sure we're all working on the same page, and that there are services available locally, and if not, if we're moving in that direction, just so we could enhance their vitality as well. Do we have that meeting or plan going forward with Sun Street?
Prior to the last board meeting, we actually had one in-person meeting, and then I made a personal phone contact with their manager and expressed our intent to do a contract with them for their new home, their third home. But the timing was the issue. Apparently, they wanted it to occur earlier rather than later.
And even if we're in this contract, Alan, somewhere down the line, and we get the reimbursement, situation with Medi-Cal or Medicare in line, would we be able to refer people to Sun Street, even though we're in contract with?
Oh yes, not a problem. It's always been our intention to utilize the Sun Street's new facility at the point in time when we're capable of doing that with a reimbursement source.
Okay. Supervisor Medina?
Supervisor Munzer and Dela Cruz, they had a ad hoc meeting, is that right?
Yes.
And were you there, Alan?
At the ad hoc meeting?
Yes.
I met with Supervisor Munzer. I did not join the joint meeting with Sun Streets and the supervisors.
Okay. Can you kind of disclose what happened at that meeting?
I should have gone to that.
Supervisor Munzer?
I put on that ad hoc.
So we had separate meetings. Supervisor Dela Cruz and myself met with the Sun Street people, heard their concerns, and Alan had a prior commitment and was not able to meet at the time, so we met with him in Ray Espinosa's office separately. My concern, Alan, and I haven't gotten this answered yet, we received a letter of noncompliance, which you have acknowledged, but you're saying that by renewing all the contracts that we've had in place before would put us back in compliance, but those contracts didn't put us in compliance in the first place. I'm kind of confused on that. The other thing, and again, this has kind of been just getting bits and pieces of this, and because we weren't able to everybody sit together. Several meetings back, we approved a contract with a house in Salinas, and the name is escaping me right now, who is basically doing the same thing that Sun Street is offering here in Hollister. And I kind of wonder why that contract wasn't shifted over to Sun Street at that time. We've already approved it, so it's probably water under the bridge. But the way this whole process has been rolled out has been confusing. And like I said, I do want clarification of how, by renewing the same contracts that you said we were not in compliance with the federals, I believe it's the Department of Health, how we're going to be in compliance now by renewing these same contracts.
Well, the non-compliance letter came out from the Department of Health Care Services. I believe it was issued in late May, towards the end of the fiscal year. And when our contracts end at the end of a fiscal year, they are no longer fulfilling the contract obligation because they are no longer, in effect, contracts. So by renewing the existing contracts that also are components of the drug Medi-Cal required components, we became in compliance with some of the required elements. There were also new required elements, such as methadone, which has never existed in this county, which I negotiated a new contract with the provider Valley Health to provide that component. So we renewed existing contracts of required components, and we added a new component, methadone treatment, which never existed. So I think you're referencing the contract with a similar facility, and that was a contract renewal. It was a quick way to deal with this particular issue, and it was a renewal of a contract that had already existed anyhow, so it was something we had been doing previously. So we were trying to get into compliance as soon as we could, because the letter that was written actually required compliance by July the 30th.
Okay, so you have multiple contracts with multiple providers for different services, not necessarily the same service as this. I know, because you need a bed or a room or a facility, and you never know who's going to have that ability to grant that when you need it at that moment. So we have multiple contracts. Why can't we have multiple contracts for this situation also? Why can't we have a second contract with Sun Street to you know, if the Salinas facility doesn't have beds available, we can shift over to them. I guess we have someone who wants to provide these services, and you wrote out a letter of support to them when they were going to the Monterey Peninsula Foundation looking for grant money to buy the facility. And why can't we do a second contract with them?
We can do a second contract with them. What I was trying to prevent is having to just turn around and quickly do an amendment to that contract when we became what's called an ODS, Other Drug Services Provider, which would allow us for drug Medi-Cal reimbursement.
And you mentioned that before. What's the problem with doing an amendment to a contract?
It just becomes more cumbersome. My top priority was to get us in compliance the quickest and easiest way that we could, which was to renew the components that we had already in place, which we typically do anyhow at the first of every fiscal year.
Okay. So I guess, Mr. Chair,
Okay, so here we are. So you said it perfectly. You just said it was cumbersome for you. And so what I'm trying to look at is what's best for our community. What's best for San Benito County? So what I'm looking at is if we said this $50,000 will go to Sunset, what do you have to do from there?
Well, the main issue that I'm trying to get approved today is the Encompass contract, which is a men's home. This particular home that we're talking about, the Sun Streets wants to contract with, is a women's home. I can do a contract with them if that's what you'd like me to do. That's not a problem. There probably won't be enough money to provide utilization, purchase of beds for all of the contracts, but that's always been an issue, so I don't really...
Yeah, what we have on the agenda today is to renew with Encompass Community Services.
For a men's home.
Now, the idea here is if we do not agree with this and we want this to go to Sunset, is it possible?
Well, it's possible, but then you would have another women's home, and we need a men's home.
And they serve no men whatsoever?
No. It's women's perinatal. That is the contract they're asking for.
Well, we'll hold on to that thought in a couple minutes here.
Sure.
So if I can have the floor back, Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think what my recommendation would be to go ahead and approve this contract with Santa Cruz, because we do need for Allen to be in compliance, we need a contract for a men's facility. And then I would like to see him bring back another contract utilizing the same $50,000. I believe
$50,000, yes.
The woman's home for Salinas was $50,000 also?
Yeah, those are basically placeholder figures if we need that
I
particular
understand.
bed.
So we utilize the same placeholder dollars and come up with a contract for the local women's facility here in Hollister.
If that's what you'd like me to do, we're
Yes.
capable of doing that.
That would be my recommendation.
I'll support the Supervisor Munster's recommendation.
Oh,
Mr. Chair.
okay. Before we go into all that, why don't we open it up for public comment? Anyone from the public would like to speak?
Yes, Vicky Porcino.
Good morning. I'm Vicki Fortino. I'm the Executive Director of United Way, and I'm here just to support Sun Street Centers and the services that they provide. They came to us with the letter of intent from the county saying that these services were going to be supported in our community. So United Way, along with several other of our nonprofit agencies, were readily on board. These are services that we definitely need provided in our community. Locally, we need it provided, to our residents right here instead of sending them out of county. As you know, this is an underserved population, and it is difficult to send them out of county. So I'm basically here to just let you know that Sun Street entered our community in good faith with the full intention of the support of the county. And they do have the women's residential facility open. They bought the property to do that. They are in the process. They have the men's sober living environment. They're here. They're going to provide these services. They already provide these services in Salinas. So if it's a problem of compliance, and we fully intend to support Sun Street Center here locally, why are we giving the contract to Santa Cruz? Why not give it to Sun Street, where they are providing these services in Salinas until they do get it here? I'm not sure, I don't understand all the Medi-Cal and Medicaid complications of it, and I know that there's a lot of ins and outs in that. But I hope that you realize that Sun Street they've been around for a long time. They just opened a new facility in King City. They've been in Monterey County for decades, and they have a proven track record of success. So I strongly urge you to support Sun Street, and in any language that you can to make them part of this contract. I think it would be beneficial for our county and for our residents. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Chair and Council member, supervisors. My question that I always have on this, and I would like to get answered, is how much of this is going to administrative fees? I think we went through this just a while ago, and I think it was a different project, but didn't we just give out $70,000 or $100,000, and the city was supposed to equal the amount? Was that just for homeless, or does this also fall in line with this? I mean, now we're up to $150,000, and how much of this goes to administrative fees? Thank you.
Anyone else from public? If not, I'll bring it back to the board. I guess we have some form of a direction. Supervisor Munzer, you want to reiterate it into a motion? Or
my motion would be to accept staff recommendation with the addition that the health director bring back a second contract for utilizing the same dollars, a second contract with Sun Street.
For women, right?
For women's.
Okay. I'll second the motion, Mr. Chair.
Okay. I have a motion on the floor. All those in favor say aye.
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 Oppose? Okay. There you go.
Thank you.
Thank you. CEO Espinoza, item 22.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to invite John Girton. This is what we talked about during our department head announcement. So, John.
Right. Good morning again. So this item is for naming the new road that's been is currently being constructed around the high school, keeping or trying to be consistent with the language that was in the River Park master plan and with the name of the project and everything. We have a resolution before you for naming the road River Parkway, which we think will go with the future plan for the park that will go there, so that everybody knows where they're going. And we'd like to get this approved today so that we can actually name the road on Friday the 5th when we open it, so people know what the name of the road is.
Supervisor Medina.
I'm probably the only one that, I'm not against it, but River Parkway, I've lived in many cities and counties and states, and there's so many river parkways. Now, my idea, it just came to me Friday when I was reading this agenda item, is Baylor Way or Baylor Highway. I mean, I know it's somewhat attached to the high school, and I understand what you're saying is it's so people know that it's the end of it is the park that's coming. But I like the idea, and I'm not sure if other people would talk about that, but it would be Baylor Way because that is the mascot of our high school, and that is so close to the proximity of the high school.
I mean, also, Mr. Chair, I'll support Baylor Way if the high school is willing to donate some more money into the table.
You know, I think you got a good point, Supervisor De La Cruz.
I don't argue with that.
You know, it's all in all seriousness, this road is costing a little bit more money, a lot more money than what we thought.
It's just throwing it out there.
No, I'm with you. I'm not.
But I know last time I named a road, it was nothing but trouble for me, so I'm keeping my mouth shut.
What was that?
That was a Red Barn Road, and it was almost caused a war between two counties.
Yep.
Oh.
Yep. I think Parkway is perfect. In my
Other supervisors with any thoughts? If not, we'll save those, what the thoughts are, to open it to public comment. Anyone from the public?
I don't think there's any possibility that you would think that we would not be behind the River Parkway as a name for that road.
I was waiting for that.
I knew that.
It's fantastic that the road has been put in, that we're looking forward to, you know, the next rollout in the regional park, and there's a Lincoln Street in every town should we take those all out. I think for us to have a River Parkway Road is something to really be proud of, that we can say we are in the mainstream of developing good public facilities for our city and counties, or for our county and cities. So absolutely reaches for it, and I'll leave it to Robin.
Yeah. I think that naming it the River Parkway lets the county know that we really are serious about putting this 25, 28-year plan into place. And with the city making the first section between Bridgevale and the Apricot Park as a trail, and then adding this new road along the river, it makes a substantial chunk of our River Parkway, River Trail. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good morning. I wasn't going to, but I guess I have to throw myself in there. Marty Richmond, thank you very much. No, just kidding. I like River Parkway, and I see where Mark was going. Supervisor Medina was going with that, and I just read an article the other day, and I've been really into focusing on saving the grizzly that were taken off the endangered species. And yesterday afternoon, actually, the federal judge put them back on the endangered species list. That being said, we are currently about to receive in San Benito County at Pinnacle some condors from Idaho that were saved and are being brought over here. What about adding Condor River Parkway? just adding condor, because we are known as the sanctuary for condors, and that is what we're, San Benito County is known for the pinnacles. So maybe we could just add that word to it. That's just my 2 cents worth. Thank you.
Thank you. Problem is, with that suggestion, isn't there a high school that has condors as their mascot?
North Monterey.
Oh, North Monterey. Sorry, that idea is not gone. Yeah.
San Jose.
Anyone else from the public? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board to make a very important decision.
Make a motion to approve River Road Parkway as a name.
Second.
Okay, so the motion is to name it River Parkway.
Yes.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none. All right. Good. Thank you. County Council closed session items.
Yeah, we'll adjourn to closed session for to discuss two potential cases under Government Code Section 54956.9, Subdivision D2, significant exposure to litigation. And there was an addendum, and we are adding a third closed session item, conference with labor negotiators, to and the designated representatives are Burke Dunphy, Danya Torres-Wong, Ray Espinoza, Joe Paul Gonzalez, Melinda Casillas, Elvia Barocchio, Steve Coffey. And that's under Government Code Section 54957.6.
Okay, anybody from the public would like to comment on any closed session items? If not, we'll adjourn to closed session.
The school district?